So hello everyone, in today's video we will be looking at innerHTML in JavaScript. So before we do that, I have already created my folder and I've opened it up on VS Code here. That's the text editor of choice. So I'm going to create a new file and call it index.html, because before we can read JavaScript we are going to need a HTML document. So I've loaded my boilerplate. Then in here I'm going to create another file, call this one scripts.js. So this is now my JS file. So I want to link from HTML to JavaScript. So I use my script element and point to script.js. So from index I'm going to copy path here. So this just allows me to load it up on the browser. And this is it. So I'm going to inspect my page so that I have access to my console, since I know that I'm dealing with JavaScript. Okay, so let's talk about innerHTML. Now, innerHTML is just a way for us to edit the HTML code from JavaScript. That's a way for us to do that. So I'm going to start by creating a div element here, this div, and inside this div I would give this div a class of box. Now the first thing that we are going to look at before we get to innerHTML is how we can select documents or elements from HTML onto JavaScript. So my div already has a class of box that I'm going to use to uniquely identify this element, so that even if I have another div, it does not point to this second one, but it's going to point to the first one that has a class of box. So down to in my script, I'll just pass in a comment here that says innerHTML, like that, because that's what we are talking about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. Now the essence of this variable is every time I select an element from HTML, I need to store it in a variable, and I need to give it a name now. So I'm going to call this variable header. So const of header, just like that. It's going to be called something. Now there are various ways we can select an element in HTML in JavaScript. So the first one I'm going to be using, I'll be using document.something. Now this document here, this text just signifies that we're trying to point to the HTML document that this script file is linked to. And if you check from index, we have a link here. So which means that the document that is coming from JavaScript here is pointing to this HTML document. Okay, so I'll do a get element by class name. So get element by class name now is going to point out the class names of elements. But at this stage, I have to specify the name of the class I want to select. And I want to select a class of box, just like this. So I'll do a box. That's it. Box, just like that. So with this now, I have been able to select this div element here, but in my JavaScript this time around, it is called header. So I want to try another method. So I will just comment this one out. And I'm going to create another constant following the same syntax. So constant of header2. Let me spell that properly. Header2 is going to be equal to document. Same thing. This time around I'm going to be using .query selector. Now query selector allows us to select by class name as well as tag names. So a tag name is just this div here. So I'll pass in my strings and then I'll pass in dot. This dot notation means that what I want to pass in next has to be a class name, and I want to select a class of box. So that's it. So my div element here now is selected in my JavaScript as header2. Alright. So what I want to do to header2 now is I want to edit the HTML version of header2. So and that's where innerHTML comes in. So what I would do is let me just send header2 to the console, and I would pass in a basic text here that says hello world. Hello world, just like that. So that when I check out my console, it gives me this div, the class of box, a text that says hello world, just to prove that actually my element has been selected in JavaScript. And if you check this, it's coming from a script file .js and coming from line 7, and that should correspond with what is in here. Okay, that works. So what I want to do now is I want to edit the HTML version now of header2. So I'll do header2 dot innerHTML, just like this. Now this innerHTML allows me write HTML code. So I have to pass it in as a string. if I pass in the h1 element here, and I'm going to close that tag, and in here I'll just pass in a text that says this is inner HTML, basically meaning how it works. When I check on my browser and I refresh it, it updates the text here that was once reading hello world to a h1 now. You can see how big and bold it is. This is a proof that this is a h1 element that says this is inner HTML. That's how that works. So with inner HTML now, we can always point to our HTML document and edit, and we can edit more than the text this time around. We can also edit the HTML version of our document. Let's assume we wanted to edit something else. So I'll create another, or rather I have another div here. Now I'm going to give this div an ID. So I'll give it an ID of container. Then I want to select this container in my script. That's my JavaScript. So it's always best to select at the top of your document. So I'll create a const here. So I'm going to call this const header3, just like that, and I'll use my query selector once more. So I'll do a document dot query selector, and I have to specify that I want to select an ID this time around. So while this dot here was pointing to class name, the hashtag is going to be pointing to ID name, and the ID I gave in my document is container. So I'll just drop it there, container. So that in here now, I will do header3 dot inner HTML is going to be equal. Now, apart from writing strings like this, I could use my backticks. That's the key immediately underneath your escape key, like that. And in there, I could write, I want to pass in another h1 element. This one says this is the second inner HTML. And I'm going to close the tag, just like that, h1, like this. So when I check on my browser and I refresh, this was pointing to the first div we created, and now this is pointing to the second div we created. And if you observe, the same thing happens. So that's how the inner HTML works in JavaScript.